The billionaire got his maid pregnant and kicked her out. Years later, he begged for mercy. The boardroom was silent. 30 floors above Atlanta, in a corner office that cost more than most people's homes, a man stood at the window looking down at the city he used to own. Marcus Adami was 52 years old. His hair had gone completely gray in the last 7 years. His hands trembled when he thought no one was watching. And standing across from him, cold as ice, was the woman who had taken everything. She didn't look like a maid anymore. She never would again. Before I tell you what happened in that room, before I reveal the conversation that would finally break Marcus Adami and force him to face the consequences of his actions, I need you to understand where this story began. Because this isn't just a tale of revenge. This is a story about what happens when you discard someone you thought was nothing, only to discover they were everything. This is what happens when the world finally sees what you refuse to see. So if you love stories where arrogance meets its reckoning, where the invisible become visible, where the person you threw away becomes the person who owns you, hit subscribe right now and turn on those notifications, because this story is about to change everything you thought you knew about power, about worth, and about what it means to be truly seen. Now let me take you back to where it all began. 20 years ago, Marcus Adami was a man on fire. At 32 years old, he had already built an empire. His real estate company, Adami Properties, was the largest African-American-owned development firm in the Southeast. He had built apartment complexes, shopping centers, luxury condos. He had made himself a billionaire. And like most men who climb very high very fast, he had developed a dangerous belief. He believed he was untouchable. Marcus lived in a mansion in Buckhead with 12 bedrooms, marble floors imported from Italy, a home theater, a wine cellar that held 5,000 bottles, and a staff of 10 people who took care of his every need. There was his personal chef, his driver, his personal assistant, his security team, and his housekeeping staff. And among that housekeeping staff was a young woman from Lagos named Zainab Okonkwo. She was 24 years old when she arrived at Marcus's mansion on a Tuesday morning in the spring of 2004. Zainab had come to America with a dream and a fear. The dream was to build a life, to send money home to her parents, to eventually bring her younger siblings to safety. The fear was that she didn't know if she was strong enough to make it happen. She had left Lagos with 2 suitcases, a high school diploma, and a prayer. A family friend had helped her find the job as a live-in housekeeper for Marcus Adami. It paid $900 a month, room and board included. To Zainab, it felt like fortune. She didn't know what she was walking into. On her first day, Marcus barely noticed her. He was too busy being important. He spent his mornings on conference calls, his afternoons at construction sites, his evenings closing deals that made him richer. Zainab worked quietly in the background, as housekeeping staff are supposed to do. She woke at 5 in the morning. She cleaned the 16 bathrooms in that mansion by hand. She organized his closet, a closet that contained more clothing than most people own in their entire lives. She did his laundry, pressed his shirts with care, prepared his house for entertaining. She made sure everything was perfect because that was her job, and she took her job seriously. For the first 6 months, that's all she was to Marcus, invisible, and then something shifted. It started on an ordinary Wednesday evening. Marcus had come home exhausted from a site inspection. His back was aching. He had argued with his business partner about a deal that was falling apart. His mother had called and told him he needed to settle down, get married, give her grandchildren. The weight of his life, the weight of maintaining his image, had crushed him that day, and he wanted to escape it all. He found Zainab in the kitchen. She was preparing his dinner, moving through the space with an efficiency and grace that suggested she belonged there, that cooking was not just a job but a calling. He watched her work. She didn't know he was there. She hummed softly as she stirred a pot of what smelled like jollof rice. Her movements were precise, economical, beautiful. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt something other than the pressure to be great. He felt calm. "That smells incredible," he said. Zainab jumped, startled. "Mr. Adami, I did not hear you come in. I have your dinner ready in 5 minutes. Shall I serve it in the dining room?" "No," Marcus said, surprising himself. "Can I eat here, in the kitchen?" Zainab hesitated. The other staff members didn't eat with him. The hierarchy was clear. Employers and employees didn't share meals. but she was a kind person, and this man seemed sad. "Of course, sir, let me set a place for you." They ate together at the kitchen island, and something happened that would set the course of the next 20 years of his life. They talked. Not about business, not about the weather, not about the trivial things people discuss to fill silence. They talked about real things. Marcus told her about the pressure he felt, about the expectations that came with his name and his position. He told her about his father, who had been a janitor, who had worked 3 jobs so Marcus could go to good schools. He told her about the way his father had died before seeing his son become successful, and how that failure haunted him every single day. Zainab listened. She didn't interrupt or try to fix his sadness. She simply listened, and then she told him about Lagos. About growing up in a house with 9 people in 3 rooms. About her mother selling fruit at the market for 12 hours a day. About her siblings who were so smart but wouldn't get to go to university because there wasn't enough money. About the fear she carried every single day that she would fail them. "I feel like I have to be perfect," she said, staring at her plate. "Like if I make one mistake, everything will collapse. My family depends on the money I send. If I lose this job, they suffer." Marcus looked at this young woman, this girl really, who carried the weight of 8 people on her shoulders and worked harder than anyone he'd ever met. And he felt something break open inside him. "You're the most perfect person I know," he said quietly. It wasn't a line, he meant it, and that's how it started. Over the next 6 months, their relationship deepened. Not in the traditional way. They didn't go to restaurants. They didn't hold hands in public. They couldn't. The risk was too high. Instead, they created a secret world within his mansion. Late-night conversations in the kitchen. Stolen moments in the library where he would read to her while she rested her head on his shoulder. The way he would bring her books about architecture, because she had mentioned that she loved buildings. The way she would save him portions of special meals, things that reminded her of home, because she knew he was always eating alone despite being surrounded by people. Their relationship became his life raft. Marcus was drowning in the expectations of being who he thought he needed to be. And Zainab, without asking for anything, gave him a reason to breathe. She made him feel like he didn't have to be perfect. She made him feel like he could be just a man, not a billionaire, not a genius, just a man who was trying his best. Of course, it couldn't last. Nothing hidden ever does. 3 months into their romance, Zainab discovered she was pregnant. She told him on a Sunday morning in the kitchen, the same place where they had first connected. She was shaking as she showed him the test. 2 pink lines, a life, a consequence, a moment that would define everything. Marcus held the test in his hands and felt his entire world shift. A baby, his baby, with his housekeeper. He thought of his mother, who had already been pressuring him to marry someone appropriate, someone from a good family, someone who could help him build his empire further. He thought of his business partners, who would see this as weakness, as a distraction. He thought of the media, which would have a field day with a billionaire and his pregnant maid. "We'll figure this out," he told her, even though he had no idea what that meant. "I promise you, Zainab, I will take care of you. I will take care of our child." Zainab believed him. She had no reason not to. She was in love with him. She was already imagining their future. A modest house somewhere. A job that let her work from home. The ability to bring her family over legally. She imagined Marcus would do the right thing. People with everything, she reasoned, could afford to do the right thing. But she had misunderstood what it meant to be in love with a man whose identity was built entirely on image. The phone call came 3 days later. Marcus's mother wanted to visit. She would be arriving Friday. Marcus felt panic seize his chest. His mother would see immediately. She was perceptive, sharp, and she would disapprove with the fury of a woman who had raised a son to care about appearances above all else. That Thursday night, Marcus told Zainab they needed to be careful. They needed to not be seen together. They needed to maintain appearances. Zainab agreed. Of course she agreed. What choice did she have? His mother arrived on Friday morning, and immediately everything changed. Amara Ademi was 61 years old, formidable, elegant, and absolutely convinced that she had built her son's success through her own guidance and breeding. She walked through his mansion like she was inspecting troops. She looked at every corner, every painting, every piece of furniture, assessing, judging, finding things to complain about. And then she saw Zainab. She saw the way Zainab moved through the mansion. The way her eyes followed Marcus when he walked into a room. The way there was a lightness to her that wasn't there before. A mother knows these things. A mother's instinct is sharper than any detective. And Amara Adami's instinct screamed at her that something was wrong. By Saturday, she had confirmed it. She found pregnancy vitamins in Zainab's room. She noticed the nausea, the morning sickness that Zainab was trying to hide. She put the pieces together and she was disgusted. Disgusted by her son. Disgusted by the girl who had seduced him. Disgusted by the fact that her plans for his future, carefully laid out over decades, were about to be destroyed by a foreign housekeeper. She called her son into his study that evening. Marcus came in unsuspecting, but he knew. He could feel his life collapsing before she even spoke. His mother closed the door and looked at him with disappointment so profound it was like a physical blow. "Tell me it's not true," she said. "Tell me you have not been sleeping with the help." Marcus said nothing. Silence was an admission. "That girl is pregnant, isn't she?" His mother's voice was ice. "My God, Marcus, what were you thinking? How could you be so stupid?" "I love her," Marcus said. The words felt hollow even as he spoke them. His mother laughed. A sharp, cruel laugh. "You love her? Marcus, that girl used you. She saw an opportunity and she took it. She got pregnant deliberately to trap you. Don't be naive. Women like that have no shame. They will do anything to escape their situations." "She didn't trap me," Marcus said, but already doubt was creeping in. His mother had a way of making her version of reality seem like the only possible truth. "You need to get rid of her," his mother said flatly. "Pay her off if you must. But that girl and that baby cannot be part of your life. Do you understand what will happen to your reputation if this becomes public? Your business partners will think you're unstable. The media will have a field day. You will lose everything you've built." Marcus felt the weight of his entire world pressing down on him. His mother was right about one thing. The world he had built was fragile. It was built on image, on the myth of perfection, on the story of a self-made man who had transcended his origins. A pregnant African housekeeper didn't fit that narrative. "I'll talk to her," Marcus said quietly. "You'll do more than talk," his mother said. "You'll end it tonight." That night, Marcus sat in his study and practiced the words he was going to say. He rehearsed them like they were lines in a play. He needed to convince Zainab to leave. He needed to make her understand that this was impossible. He needed to break her heart in a way that would make her accept it as inevitable. He found her in the guest cottage where she lived, a small space behind the main mansion that the staff used. She was reading a book about American history that Marcus had given her. She looked up when he entered, and her face lit up with joy. And that's when Marcus Adami understood what his mother had been trying to tell him. The only thing that would work was to destroy the light in her eyes. "We need to talk," he said. Those 5 words were enough. Zainab knew. Her hand went to her stomach protectively. "The pregnancy," Marcus said, and he made his voice cold, detached, the voice of a businessman closing a deal. "I can't be part of it. I can't have a child with you. I won't have a child with you." "What are you saying?" Zainab's voice was small. "I'm saying this is over. You need to leave tomorrow." "Marcus, please, I'm carrying your child, our child, please don't do this." But Marcus had already made the decision to protect himself. He had already decided that his reputation was more important than his unborn child. He had already chosen the life his mother wanted him to have over the life his heart wanted. "I'll pay you," he said, and pulled out a checkbook. "Here, $100,000. It's more than enough to start over somewhere else. You take the money, you go back to Nigeria, you have the baby, and you never contact me again." "I don't want your money," Zainab said, her voice breaking. "I want you. I want our baby to know his father." "Then you're more foolish than I thought," Marcus said coldly. He wrote the check and placed it on the table. "You have until tomorrow morning to leave. I will call a car to take you to the airport. If you don't go quietly, I will make sure you're deported. I have the resources to do it. Don't test me." Zainab stared at the check. $100,000. The amount of money that represented years of her work, years of her sacrifice. But it was also a message. It was the amount Marcus Adami would pay to erase her from his life. It was the price of their love. She took the check. What choice did she have? She was a foreigner on a work visa. She was pregnant. She had no one. She was entirely vulnerable, and Marcus knew it. The next morning, Zainab left Marcus's mansion with 2 suitcases, a checkbook, and a baby growing inside her that Marcus Adami would refuse to acknowledge for the next 17 years. The pain of that departure was something that would never fully leave her. Not because she spent years pining for Marcus, not because she couldn't move forward, but because she had to explain to her child, over and over again, why his father didn't want him. She had to build a life alone. She had to work 2 jobs while pregnant. She had to give birth without a partner's hand to hold. She had to make impossible choices about rent and food and her child's education. And she never contacted Marcus. She honored his wishes. She raised their son, whom she named a decanal, which meant one who fills the house with joy, with the hope that the name would become a prophecy, that his presence would someday bring happiness instead of the shame Marcus had felt. But life has a way of turning the tables. 7 years after Zainab left Marcus's mansion, she made a decision that would change everything. She had been working as a house manager for wealthy families in Atlanta, using her skills, her efficiency, her extraordinary work ethic to build a reputation. She was good at what she did, better than good. She was excellent, and one of the clients she worked for, a woman named Victoria Asante, noticed something in her. Victoria was a venture capitalist, a brilliant businesswoman who had made her fortune investing in startups. She saw potential the way others see buildings, and she saw potential in Zainab. "You're wasted in this job," Victoria told her one afternoon. "You're too smart, too capable, too visionary. You should be building something, not just managing someone else's home." "I have a child to raise," Zainab said. "I don't have the luxury of taking risks." "That's exactly why you should take risks," Victoria said. "Because you understand what it means to have something to lose. That clarity is worth more than a business degree. Let me help you." What Victoria offered was a partnership. She had developed a software platform for property management, something that could automate a lot of the tedious work that property managers had to do. But she needed someone who understood the realities on the ground, someone who knew what actual property managers needed. She wanted to hire Zainab, give her an equity stake, and work with her to build the company. "I don't know anything about software," Zainab said. "You don't need to," Victoria replied. "You need to know property management. You need to understand the pain points. I'll handle the technology. But I need someone I trust to tell me the truth about whether what we're building actually works." Zainab thought about her son. She thought about the job applications she could never make because she lacked credentials. She thought about the ceiling she had been living under since the day she arrived in America. And she took the risk. For the first 3 years, things were slow. Zainab worked as a consultant while still managing Victoria's properties. But then the software started to catch on. Property managers, tired of doing tedious work by hand, discovered the platform, and it simplified their lives. The company grew, revenues doubled, then tripled, then grew exponentially. By the time a decanal was 16 years old, his mother was no longer a housekeeper. She was the co-founder and chief operations officer of Asante Conquo Property Solutions, a company that had been valued at $250 million. The company had made Zainab a multimillionaire. But that wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was that Zainab had proven something to herself and to her son. She had proven that she was worth more than what Marcus had paid for her dismissal. She had proven that she didn't need a man's approval to build an empire. She had proven that the girl Marcus thought was disposable was actually irreplaceable. And then, in the spring of 2021, 17 years after he threw her out, Zainab found herself in a position she never expected to be in. She found herself owning the company that Marcus had used to build his fortune. Adami Properties had fallen on hard times. Marcus had coasted for years on the reputation he had built in his 30s and 40s, but the market changed. His competitors were smarter, more adaptable, more willing to take risks. His board members grew restless. His stock price plummeted, and then came the offers to buy him out. It was during one of these offers that Victoria Asante suggested something remarkable. "Your property management software is critical to every major property company in the Southeast," Victoria told Zainab, "including Adami Properties. Marcus is about to sell his company because he can't manage properties anymore. His systems are outdated. His people are leaving. His reputation is collapsing. What if you bought him?" Zainab's first instinct was to say no. No, she didn't want anything to do with Marcus. No, the past was the past. No, revenge was beneath her. But Victoria kept talking. "Not for revenge," Victoria said. "For justice. For the fact that a man threw away his child and built his fortune without paying for what he did. For the fact that he's about to lose everything without ever understanding why. For the fact that his son deserves to see his father face consequences. And that's when Zainab understood. Adekanal was 17, he was old enough to understand. He was old enough to see what she was about to do. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for Marcus to know that the girl he had discarded had become the woman who owned him. Zainab made her move. She quietly assembled a group of investors. She worked with lawyers to structure the acquisition. She negotiated with Marcus's board members who were desperate to see the company sold. And on a Tuesday morning in May, Ademi Properties was acquired by a holding company controlled by a Santa Conquo. Marcus Ademi didn't know who had bought his company until the day of the board meeting where he would be introduced to the new ownership. He walked into the conference room on the 31st floor of the building that bore his name. He was expecting some faceless private equity firm. He was expecting to be asked to stay on as a consultant. He was expecting to fade into the background and live out his remaining years on the sale proceeds and his lingering reputation. He was not expecting to see Zainab Okonkwo sitting at the head of the table. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. Marcus gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. The woman he had paid to disappear was now his new owner. The housekeeper he had discarded was now the CEO of his company. The girl he had broken was now the woman who held his future in her hands. "Hello, Marcus," Zainab said. Her voice was professional, calm, entirely devoid of emotion. "Welcome to the new Ademi Properties. Please sit down. We have a lot to discuss." Marcus sat. He had no choice. He felt like a man watching his life replay in reverse. "The terms of the acquisition are as follows," Zainab said, speaking like she was reading from a script she had memorized. "You will maintain the title of founder, but you will have no operational control. Your salary will be reduced from $2 million per year to $600,000 per year. You will serve in an advisory capacity only, and your advice will be reviewed by me before it's implemented. You will comply with a non-disparagement clause, meaning you cannot speak negatively about this company or this acquisition to anyone. And you will sign a document acknowledging your legal responsibility to your son, Adekanal, which we will file with the court." Marcus felt the words like blows. "Zainab, please, we can talk about this." "We can." "There's nothing to talk about," Zainab interrupted. "You made your choice 17 years ago. I'm simply helping you live with the consequences of that choice. I have every right. I own your company. I own the building you're sitting in. I own the future of everyone who works here. And I'm going to make sure that you understand, every single day, the gravity of what you did." Marcus wanted to argue. He wanted to plead. He wanted to make her understand that he had been a different person then, that he had been under pressure, that he had made a mistake. But he looked into Zainab's eyes, and he saw something that terrified him. He saw someone who had no interest in his explanations. She had made her peace with what had happened. She had moved forward, and she had become so much more than he had ever been. "Does Adekanal know?" Marcus asked quietly. "He knows that you're his father," Zainab said. "He's known that since he was 3 years old. I never kept it from him. I told him the truth. I showed him the check you gave me. I explained that sometimes fathers make choices that have nothing to do with their children's worth and everything to do with their own fears. He's understood that for a very long time." "Can I see him?" Marcus asked. "Can I explain?" "No," Zainab said. And that single word carried the weight of 17 years of loneliness, of impossible decisions, of a woman who had been forced to be both mother and father because a man chose his reputation over his child. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to rewrite the narrative now that you're desperate. You chose, and now Adekanal will choose. Maybe someday he'll want to meet you. Maybe he won't. But that decision belongs to him now, not to you. Just like the decision about your future belongs to me." The board meeting lasted 3 more hours. During that time, Zainab systematically laid out how she was going to restructure Ademi Properties. She was going to modernize the systems. She was going to invest in the people. She was going to rebuild the company's reputation by treating everyone who worked there with the dignity that Marcus had never offered. She was going to make the company profitable again, and she was going to do it without Marcus's input. When it was over, Marcus stood up to leave. His legs felt weak. His vision was blurry. He felt like a man who had just watched his entire identity crumble in real time. As he walked toward the door, Zainab said one more thing. Marcus, I want you to understand something. I didn't do this for revenge. Revenge is beneath me. I did this because your company was destroying people the way you destroyed me. I did this because some things that are broken need to be rebuilt correctly. And I did this because your son deserves to see the truth about his father. I'm going to make sure he sees it every day. Every day he comes to work in this building, he's going to see what happens when someone who treated people like they were disposable has to answer to someone who knows their true value. Marcus left the building that day and drove to his mansion. It was evening. The sun was setting over Atlanta, painting the sky orange and purple. He stood in his study, the same study where 17 years ago he had made the choice to destroy Zainab and his unborn child. And for the first time in decades, Marcus Adami wept. He thought about a decanal, a child he had never met. A child he had chosen not to know, a child who was now old enough to judge him. And he understood that no amount of wealth, no amount of business success, no amount of reputation management would ever make him feel like he had done the right thing. The weeks that followed were the most humbling of Marcus's life. He came to work every day and watched as Zainab systematically changed everything. She brought in new leadership. She implemented new policies that protected workers and paid them fairly. She installed systems that made the company more efficient and more profitable. And slowly, the company transformed. But more than that, Marcus watched as people began to see him differently. They whispered when he walked past. They knew who he was. They knew that the founder of this company had been brought to his knees by the woman who now ran it. And in their eyes, he saw judgment. He saw pity. He saw the consequence of his actions reflected back at him over and over again. 3 months into the new regime, a decanal came to the office for the first time. Zainab had arranged for him to do a summer internship. She wanted him to understand his father's business, to see what his father had built, to make his own judgment about the man who had refused to acknowledge him. A decanal was 17 years old. He was smart. He was kind. He was everything a son should be. He looked like Marcus, but he had Zainab's eyes, which meant he had her ability to see the truth of a situation without flinching. Marcus was told that his son would be working in the office. He was told where a decanal's desk would be. He was told not to approach him without permission. And so Marcus went to work every day knowing that somewhere in the building, his son was working. Somewhere in the building, a piece of him that he had rejected was living and breathing and forming his own judgments about the man Marcus had become. It took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of working in the same building before a decanal approached his father. He came to Marcus's office on a Friday afternoon, closed the door behind him, and sat down without being invited. My mother told me the story, a decanal said. She told me about the check. She told me about the choice you made. She told me the truth. Marcus didn't know what to say. He had rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times, but all his rehearsals had involved him making excuses, explaining his actions, trying to justify the unjustifiable. But looking at his son, Marcus realized that none of that would work. This young man was old enough to understand complexity and young enough to still believe in things like right and wrong. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and the words felt inadequate even as he spoke them. "I'm sorry for not being your father. I'm sorry for making the choice I made. I'm sorry for all the moments I missed. I'm sorry for being a coward." A decanal stared at his father for a long moment. Then he said, "You know what the worst part is? It's not that you weren't there. A lot of kids grow up without fathers. The worst part is that you knew I existed and you decided I wasn't worth knowing. You decided your reputation was more important than me. And now my mother owns your company, and you're answering to the woman you rejected, and you finally understand how powerless she felt. And maybe that's what needed to happen for you to understand what you did." "I understand now," Marcus said. "I understand that I threw away the most important thing in my life. I'm not important because of my mother's success," a decanal said. "I'm important because I'm a human being, I exist, I have value. And you treated me like I was a transaction. You treated my mother like she was garbage. And then you expected your life to continue as if none of it had happened. Do you know how insulting that is? Not the rejection, the casualness of it, like we were nothing." Marcus had no response. There was no response. His son was right. the injustice of his actions wasn't just that he had rejected them. It was that he had rejected them so casually, as if they were nothing, as if his convenience was more important than the existence of a human being. "I'm not here to forgive you," a decanal said. "I'm here to tell you the truth. I'm here to tell you that I've been fine without you. I've been more than fine. I've been great. My mother raised me to be a good person, to treat people with respect, to understand that everyone has value. You could have been part of my life, but you chose not to be. And that choice was yours, not mine. That consequence is yours, not mine." He stood up to leave. "Will I see you again?" Marcus asked. A decanal paused at the door. "Maybe. Once you really understand what you did. Once you're not just sorry because you lost your company and your status. Once you're sorry because you hurt two people who didn't deserve it. Then maybe. But I'm not waiting for that. I have a life. I'm going to live it. And you're going to stay here and learn what it means to be insignificant." He left, and Marcus understood what his son had just told him. He had lost everything that mattered. Not his company, not his money, not his reputation. He had lost the chance to know his son. He had lost the opportunity to be part of something that transcended business and status and image. He had lost the possibility of love. And the most painful part was that it was entirely his fault. Over the next year, something extraordinary happened. Zainab transformed Adami Properties from a dying company into one of the most innovative and successful property management companies in the country. She paid her workers well. She treated them with respect. She created systems that allowed people to do their jobs efficiently and to have actual lives outside of work. And the company thrived. Marcus watched from the margins. He was still employed, still getting paid, still technically part of the company, but he had been rendered obsolete. His advice wasn't needed. His presence wasn't valued. He was a relic, a reminder of the way things used to be before someone who understood human value took over. And slowly, something shifted in him. Slowly, he stopped trying to justify what he had done. Slowly, he stopped expecting forgiveness. Slowly, he started to understand that some mistakes are simply too big to undo. Some wounds are simply too deep to heal. It was Victoria Assant, surprisingly, who became his unlikely counselor. She believed in second chances, but she also believed in accountability. She believed that Marcus needed to understand what he had done in a way that went beyond intellectual understanding. "You need to volunteer," Victoria told him one day. "You need to work with people who have nothing, just like Zainab had nothing. You need to understand what it's like to be powerless. You need to understand what it's like when the world tells you that you don't matter." And so Marcus started volunteering at a shelter for homeless families. He worked there on weekends. He helped organize meal distribution. He listened to people's stories. And slowly, he understood. He met a woman named Keisha who had been a nurse until she got sick and lost her job and couldn't afford her rent. He met a man named Thomas who had been a construction worker until an accident left him disabled and he lost everything. He met children who had done nothing wrong except be born into circumstances beyond their control. And he saw Zainab in all of them. He saw the vulnerability. He saw the way the world offered no mercy to people who were struggling. He saw the way he had taken advantage of someone simply because she was in a vulnerable position. By the end of the first year of volunteering, Marcus was a different man. Not a better man, necessarily, but a man who understood what he had done in a way that transcended apology. He understood that he had participated in a system of exploitation. He understood that he had chosen his comfort over someone else's humanity. He understood that the consequences he was now facing were less than what Zainab and a decanal had experienced. And one day, he asked to speak with Zainab. They met in her office. It was a simple space, not ostentatious, not designed to impress. It was designed to work, to function, to serve the purpose of running a company. It was the opposite of Marcus's old office, which had been designed to intimidate, to display wealth, to make people feel small. "I wanted to talk to you," Marcus said. "Not to ask for anything, not to beg for forgiveness, just to tell you something I've realized." Zainab waited. "When I paid you to leave," Marcus continued, "I told myself it was about reputation. It was about my business. It was about protecting my future. But the truth is, I was terrified. I was terrified that you would matter more to me than my company. I was terrified that I would have to choose between the life I had built and the life I actually wanted. So I chose the life I had built. And I told myself I was being pragmatic. But what I was really doing was choosing fear over love. I was choosing safety over the person who made me feel safe. Zainab said nothing. And I understand now that I didn't just hurt you, Marcus continued. I hurt myself. I hurt Adekanal. I hurt the man I could have been if I had been brave enough to love the person who gave me the most precious gift in the world. I understand now that throwing you away was throwing away my only chance at being truly happy. Do you want him to know you? Zainab asked. Because I won't stop him if he wants a relationship with you, but I won't push him toward it either. That decision has to come from him, and he has to know exactly what he's getting. Not a billionaire, not a powerful man, just someone who made a terrible choice and has spent the last year understanding why. I don't expect him to forgive me, Marcus said. I just want him to know that I understand what I did. I want him to know that I'm sorry. And I want him to know that if he ever decides he wants to know me, I'm here. That's fair, Zainab said. And Marcus, I want you to know something. I didn't buy this company to destroy you. I bought it to save myself. I bought it to prove to myself that I was worth more than the price you paid to make me disappear. You just happened to be in the building when I took control of it. You're not the most important part of this story anymore. Your son is. And the thousands of people who work for us now, people who have the dignity they deserve. You're just a man learning to live with his choices. And that was the end of their conversation. It was also the end of the part of the story where Marcus played the central role. The final chapter of this story, the part that matters most, is about Adekanal, because that is where the real redemption lies, if redemption is even possible. Adekanal was 20 years old when he made his first major business decision. He decided to start a nonprofit focused on helping young people from disadvantaged backgrounds develop skills in technology and business. He funded it with money his mother gave him, money she insisted he take because it was his to take. She had earned it, now she wanted to give it to him, and what Adekanal did with that nonprofit was remarkable. He created pathways, he created mentorship programs, he created opportunities for kids who had nothing, kids like his mother had been, to develop the skills they needed to build better lives for themselves. And the first thing he did was hire his father. Not as a consultant, not in an advisory role, as a volunteer tutor. Marcus spent 3 afternoons a week teaching high school students about business and finance and the way systems work. He taught them not what he had been taught, which was that success meant dominating others, but what he had learned, which was that success meant creating value for other people. The students called him Mr. Marcus. They didn't know that he was Adekanal's father. That wasn't important. What was important was that he showed up, consistently and humbly, and he did his best to pass on what he had learned. Adekanal watched his father work with these young people, and slowly he began to understand something. He began to understand that his father wasn't the villain of this story. His father was just a man who had been socialized into a system that valued things over people, that valued image over integrity, that valued status over love. His father was a product of his world, just as Adekanal was a product of his mother's resistance to that world. And that understanding, that compassion, that ability to see his father as a human being rather than as a mistake or a failure, that was the greatest gift Zainab had given her son. She had never filled him with hatred. She had never told him his father was a bad man. She had simply told him the truth, and she had trusted that her son would develop his own judgment. 23 years after Zainab left Marcus's mansion with a check and a broken heart, Adekanal was running one of the most successful nonprofit organizations in Atlanta. He was changing lives. He was creating opportunities. He was doing what his mother had always done, which was to see the value in people that the world had dismissed. And his father, Marcus Adami, was there beside him, not in a position of authority, not in a position of leadership, but there, present, trying, doing the work of becoming someone worthy of the son he had rejected. The interview happened on a cold January evening in the nonprofit's office. Adekanal was being asked to speak about the origins of his work, about what had inspired him to start an organization focused on lifting others up. And he told the truth. My father was a billionaire who threw away his family to protect his reputation, Adekanal said on camera. My mother was a housekeeper who rebuilt her life and became a billionaire herself. And I'm here because I learned from both of them. I learned from my father what happens when you choose power over love. And I learned from my mother what happens when you choose to build something instead of destroy it. I learned that the people the world tells us are disposable are often the most valuable. I learned that showing up, being present, treating people with dignity, that's what actually matters. And I learned that if you're willing to do the work, you can change. My father changed. He's still changing. And maybe that's the real redemption story here. Not that everything worked out perfectly, but that someone who made a terrible choice is spending the rest of his life trying to undo the damage, not because he expects forgiveness, but because it's the right thing to do. When the interview aired, millions of people watched it. People who had heard the original story of the billionaire and the maid saw the follow-up. They saw where the story had gone. They saw what justice looked like when it was served by someone with enough power to exact it, but who chose instead to create something better. And in the comment sections and on social media, people debated what it all meant. Some said Zainab was cruel for buying her company out of revenge. Others said Marcus got what he deserved. Others said Adekanal was foolish for forgiving his father. But what most people understood, what most people felt in their bones, was that this was a story about the invisible becoming visible, about the disposable becoming indispensable, about the person the world told us didn't matter proving that she mattered more than anyone had ever imagined. Years later, when Marcus was in his 70s, and Zainab was running multiple companies, and Adekanal had become one of the most important social entrepreneurs in the country, the three of them did something remarkable. They sat down together, not in a moment of crisis, but in a moment of peace. "I want to ask your forgiveness," Marcus said to Adekanal, "not because I expect it, but because it's owed." And Adekanal, who had spent his whole life understanding the complexity of human nature, who had built his entire life's work around helping people who had been discarded just like he had been, said something that his father would never forget. "I forgave you a long time ago," Adekanal said. "Not for you, for me. I forgave you because holding on to anger was holding me down. But forgiveness doesn't mean what you did was okay. It means I've decided to not let what you did define my life. You don't get to do that anymore. You did once, but not anymore." And Marcus understood that this was the real consequence, and also the real redemption. Not that Adekanal forgave him, but that Adekanal didn't need him anymore. Adekanal had built a life that was complete without his father's approval, without his father's acknowledgement, without his father's love. Adekanal had become everything Marcus could never have been, which was a man who understood that human beings have value regardless of what the world tells them, regardless of what price someone is willing to pay to make them disappear. The lesson of this story isn't that justice always wins, though in this case it did. The lesson isn't